session. I'd like to introduce our first speaker today, Bahman Shirazi. He'll be speaking and presenting a paper called Foundations of Dr. Haridas Chaudhuri's Integral Approach to Contemplative Civilization. And a little bit about Bahman. Bahman, PhD, joined CIIS as a doctoral student in the East-West Psychology Department in the early 1980s. He began teaching in various programs at CIIS as an adjunct faculty after graduation, and also held a number of academic administrative positions for nearly 3 decades. Bahman has been interested in the history of CIIS and its mother institution, the Cultural Integration Fellowship. He has had the privilege of working closely with historical documents and oral histories through many founding figures of both institutions, and served as CIIS archivist and historian during the last 12 years of his career. Bahman has also taught at several other San Francisco Bay Area universities, including ITP Sophia University and Dominican University, in the fields of integral and transpersonal psychology, Sufi psychology, and research methodology, in which he has published many book chapters and articles. He has served as guest editor for Revision and Integral Review journals, and is currently an editor of Collaboration Journal. Thank you so much for being with us, Bahman. I turn it over to you.
Thank you so much, Jonathan. Let me share with you a PowerPoint presentation that I have for tonight. I really appreciate having this opportunity to be with all of you. It's been a while since I've been at CIIS after so many years there, and this is exactly the kind of event I would have loved to be part of, but unfortunately I'm not able to, but joining you this way is equally good. Appreciating also all the work that's gone into this conference, Debashish and Jonathan and many others, I'm sure, that are involved. So thanks so much. My topic for tonight was something that I was encouraged to speak about by a friend. It did not occur to me first to speak on this topic, but it's one of those topics that was suggested by Debashish. And first I thought, well, Dr. Chaudhuri didn't say anything about the contemplative civilization. In fact, out of the almost 500 recorded talks and all the published and unpublished works and the books and articles, I mean, there's so many of them, I don't recall anything that has to do with contemplative civilization. But what I believe he came to America to do by founding the Cultural Integration Fellowship and CIIS was to actually plant the seeds of a contemplative civilization based on the vision of Sri Aurobindo. So let me say some more about him. Let me see if I can get my PowerPoint moving. Okay. So what is a contemplative civilization? Usually, I think when we think about contemplation, we associate it with yoga, meditation, or spiritual practice, usually with the esoteric dimension of major world religions. Sometimes the image of a meditator on top of a mountain comes to mind. Sometimes we think of contemplative communities. But the idea of a contemplative civilization, I think, is new. I think that there are many countries today in the world that have been around for thousands of years with long histories of spiritual traditions. And these countries, for example, India, thousands of years of contemplative practice, but I don't think that every single person or as a whole, the civilization of India has been engaged in a contemplative lifestyle. It's been certain people that have that lifestyle. So the idea of a complete civilization based on contemplation and contemplative philosophy and spirituality is something new. And I believe it hasn't happened in the past, or not now quite, even though there are so many contemplative groups and intentional communities now. But this is something that belongs to the future. In fact, the seeds of this have been sown by the idea of a Gnostic community by Aurobindo. I'm sure most of you know about the word Gnostic community. Aurobindo uses this word Gnostic, coming from gnosis, which means direct knowledge of God, to refer to the kind of individual that the culmination of integral yoga would produce. And the Gnostic community would be a group of individuals that eventually will create a world that is hopefully someday a Gnostic civilization. So this is the direction we're going to. Let me see if I can move this a little bit so I can read this to you. Here's a quotation from The Life Divine. It is only if our nature develops beyond itself, if it becomes a nature of self-knowledge, mutual understanding, unity, a nature of true being and true life, that the result can be a perfection of ourselves and our existence, a life of true being, a life of unity, mutuality, harmony, a life of true happiness, a harmonious and beautiful life. So I believe this quotation encapsulates the spirit of a Gnostic community and a Gnostic civilization. So now on to the topic of today, Dr. Chaudhuri's potential foundations for a Gnostic civilization. I say potential because he hasn't written about this, as far as I know, in any of the books or articles. But he came to the United States to bring the integral yoga of Sri Aurobindo, as well as the spiritualities of Asia, and integrated with Western philosophies, which was his great mission. But the point of such action is to create the foundations for the contemplative civilization that we're talking about. So I look at what he tried to do in this country and the principles that he set forth as soon as he came to this country, and I try to understand something about a basis for a contemplative civilization, the way that he would have imagined. So this is a sort of a hermeneutic of sorts that I'm doing here, rather than something that he directly spoke about. A little bit about Dr. Chaudhuri, for those of you who don't know much about him. He was born in East Bengal, or today's Bangladesh, May 13, 1913. And in an interview that there's a recording of, he talks about his first experience of great silence at age, he says, 13 or 14. And actually, that happens to be 1926, the year of the overmental descent. So I think there's something of a coincidence there that's very significant. But I was very inspired by him talking about this experience, because he says, I had an experience of silencing of the mind, disappearing of the mind, in a way that for almost a whole week, he said, all of my questions disappeared. So this is wonderful. I've heard so many people talk about going beyond the mind, but the way he describes an actual experience of this state that came to him spontaneously at such a young age got me intuitively connected with what such experiences could possibly be like. So this is certainly going beyond the mind. Anyway, he becomes interested in Indian philosophy and spiritual traditions, and eventually studies Indian philosophy at Calcutta University. One of his professors introduces him to Sri Aurobindo. So he studied Sri Aurobindo and eventually wrote his dissertation on the integral idealism of Sri Aurobindo. The book, Integral Philosophy of Sri Aurobindo, was published by the ashram in the late 1940s. So eventually he became a professor and chair of philosophy at Krishnagar College. Now, Dr. Chaudhuri speaks about getting a letter from Dr. Frederick Spiegelberg in the fall of 1950, which sets his destiny. He called it the call of my destiny. This was an invitation that was sent to him, to Alan Watts, and also to Dr. Judith Tyberg, who founded the Los Angeles Sri Aurobindo Center. Dr. Spiegelberg himself had gone to India and in the late 1940s and had visited Sri Aurobindo's ashram as the last thing that he did. He had a profound experience with Sri Aurobindo of healing, and when he came back to the United States, he started teaching at Stanford University about Sri Aurobindo, even before Dr. Chaudhuri had come to the United States. He was put in charge of the American Academy of Asian Studies, which a San Francisco businessman, Louis Gainsborough, founded. Gainsborough had traveled to Asia, and he thought that Americans did not know much about Asia. And this is after the World War in the late 40s and early 50s. So he put together, he asked Dr. Spiegelberg to put together a faculty, and thus Dr. Chaudhuri was invited. Dr. Chaudhuri was eventually recommended to Sri Aurobindo for this, and Sri Aurobindo agreed with that. Now, Dr. Chaudhuri did not meet Sri Aurobindo directly. When I was at the ashram's archives, I found out some evidence that he had visited the ashram from 1938 to 1950, every year during his vacation. And Bina Chaudhuri, that I knew very well, also had talked about him writing his dissertation and going to the ashram. But during this period of 1938 to 1950, Sri Aurobindo did not see anyone. So he was not able to see Sri Aurobindo directly, but he communicated with Sri Aurobindo about his dissertation. And Bina told me that Sri Aurobindo wrote to him and corrected many aspects of his work and gave commentary on it. And so this is how Sri Aurobindo knew Dr. Chaudhuri, and that's how he came to approve of his coming to the United States. So Dr. Chaudhuri comes to the United States in the spring of 1951. The first night that he stays in a hotel in the Palo Alto area, because he came to see Dr. Spiegelberg, he decided to go out at 5 o'clock in the morning. And he talks about this in a letter that I found at the Stanford archives, that he was totally amazed that there was hardly anybody on the streets at 5 o'clock in the morning. This was a cultural shock for him because, it's so different so early in India. And this was his introduction to a different culture. And later he had also other experiences, like he talks about an experience where he was on the bus and someone comes to him and says, "Can you do a palm reading for me?" So Dr. Chaudhuri got a very early taste of how different this culture is. And so he thought of making a cultural bridge between India and America before he could really accomplish his mission. He thought that a cultural integration fellowship would be something that is very important to found. And he did so very soon after he had a few groups of individuals following him and attending his lectures. He lectured widely in the Bay Area, at the Academy, also at this place called the East was called a gallery. Rudolf Schaefer, who was an artist, took care of him for a year or so, and he arranged for many lectures for him there. So he came to be known very quickly and made quite a big impact in the San Francisco Bay Area. And also eventually some of the students that wanted to study with him when the academy was falling apart in the late 1960s, suggested to him to start an educational branch of the fellowship, which became the California Institute of Asian Studies. which then later in 1980 changed names for accreditation purposes and became accredited in 1981. Dr. Chaudhuri unfortunately passed away from a heart attack in 1975 while working at his desk. So just a brief outline. In 1952, Bina and two of his young children came to the United States. After he spent a year here and realized that there's a future for him here, he was able to bring the rest of the family. He also had a son later, but there was this article in the newspaper there that talks about their coming to the US, and so it's such a big deal, it looked like at that time. There are a couple of different folders full of newspaper clippings of Dr. Chaudhuri. I only selected 2 or 3 just to show you the kinds of articles that, I mean, there's so many of these. There's dozens and dozens of newspaper clippings about Chaudhuri talking or doing something. And so here's an example of that one, an article about him and the fellowship, and something of a, I guess it must have been an ad of CIIS registration for fall of 1971. And then a workshop he gave in later years at the UC Santa Cruz Extension called The Next Steps for Man. So I'm going to move on. And the fellowship moved to this location, which is still there today, at 26 Fulton and 3rd Avenue in San Francisco. This building was donated by one of the people who was very much impacted by his work. So it's an amazing thing that happened. But notice again, 1956, this is when this building was given to the ashram. Before that, it was first at the East-West Gallery and then at his home, but later it moved to this location. Now, I've picked this selection from today's Cultural Integration Fellowship website, and I'll read it to you, which talks about their mission. Inspired by the integral yoga of Sri Aurobindo, which brought the highest values of East and West together in a creative synthesis, the Cultural Integration Fellowship brings together people from diverse cultural backgrounds and religious faiths to share in a rich array of lectures, seminars, and cultural events, seeking a dynamic integration of the cultural and spiritual values of all people. The fellowship teaches the complementarities of the world's great religions and philosophies and shelters the spiritual surge of its members. The fellowship's highest goal is a world in harmony. In the words of Dr. Chaudhuri, the Cultural Integration Fellowship looks toward a new form of humanness, one where world citizens evince loyalty to the welfare of all human beings, transcending former barriers imposed by national, ethnic, religious, doctrinal, and cultural differentiations. So here it is. Here's the statement about contemplative civilization, I think, that you can see. Sorry about that. I seem to have gone all the way to the end of this presentation. Let me just see how I did that. Okay. Let me just briefly say, and I'll do this very quickly. This is an example of one of the programs from 1966, a 3-month program. You can see very simple 8.5 by 11 piece of paper, and list of talks. And in the next, I've expanded this here so you can see the kinds of talks that Dr. Chaudhuri gave. He actually alternated between his talks every other Sunday and other people talking. So you can see some interesting topics here: how to dedicate oneself to God, the unconscious and the superconscious. Can drugs induce mystic experience? What is cybernetics? How to be creative? I can guarantee to you, if you look up 100 and many programs that fellowship has produced, you'll see something like this for every year, every quarter. And this is another example from later years in 75, a few months before Dr. Chaudhuri passed away. And again, impressive topics: Guru's role in spiritual growth, biological roots of immortality, yoga of love and devotion, meditation and metatherapy, and supramental meditation. So don't have a lot of time to talk about the fellowship, but I wanted to focus here on the statement of a triadic universal religion, creative self-fulfillment, or creative freedom, as stated in this form here, and cultural harmony. This is one of the early programs. This is one of the articulations of this. But these principles of universal religion, creative self-fulfillment and self-unfoldment, and cultural harmony or intercultural harmony were the pillars of the fellowship, which I'm using here in order to show you what the fellowship is about and that connection. One note I'd like to make here is that in my own sort of semi-formal hermeneutics, I see in this triadic formulation here a relationship between the three modes of consciousness, the three modes of being of Brahman that Aurobindo talks about: universal, individual, and transcendent. Of course, transcendent would be the religion and so on. So the order is a little different the way it's stated here. I'll read this very briefly. So Dr. Chaudhuri promoted the idea of universal religion, and I'll talk more about this a little bit later. But these are religious services, the ashram, conducted on a non-sectarian basis, stressing the universal spiritual values of life, as well as the healing and harmonizing potentials of human existence. The services of christening, marriage, spiritual initiation, funerals, etc. are provided, keeping with CIIS concepts of man as a cosmically significant focus of nature's evolutionary process. Okay. So the idea of creative freedom, or the focus on the individuality, is really important. And here he talks about giving, offering guidance for constructive self-development and suggestions for the application of fundamental spiritual principles in daily life, in human relations, etc. And cultural harmony is firmly believing in that the cultural systems of East and West, in spite of seeing divergence and conflict, are really complementary to each other. Dynamic integration of the highest cultural and humanistic values of East and West can alone lay the foundation for the unification of the human race into an integrated global society. So here in a nutshell is these three principles, which I think would have been the foundations for a contemplative culture that is at the base of the fellowship, and also at CIIS, I would think. I'll say a little bit more about these. The individual dimension, often stated as creative self-unfoldment and self-fulfillment. This is getting in touch with the psychic being as the key to the process of integral self-development, often as the first step. The activation of soul consciousness is central to both self-realization and to transformation of the outer personality, which is the key to the development of an integral contemplative culture. So this is that focus, and Dr. Chaudhuri very much emphasized this individual dimension. The other one is universal intercultural harmony. This is commitment to honor and benefit from the diversity of all cultural expressions, philosophies and religions, literatures, arts, and integrating the highest cultural and spiritual values of world tradition. So this, in a nutshell, this statement, I think, summarizes this dimension. And now, the one that I wanted to talk a little bit more about, and I'll conclude with this, is the idea of universal religion. So I know for many of us, the idea of religion seems outdated, or we may cringe or not be very interested. But in this book that came out in 1984, based on his lectures and talks and some of his writings, there's a summary of his position on universal religion, which I recommend this book if you can ever find it to anyone who's interested in this topic. But he starts the book with a critical look at religion. He says there's a growing realization that religion as a supernaturalism and otherworldliness has little use for modern man. Religious as dogmatism, fanaticism, and sectarianism is a definite impediment to his spiritual growth. Religion as the cult of personality or as the adoration of the deity as the grand old man in the sky can hardly command any serious attention today. So you can see, he's not talking about religion as we know it on the exoteric level. He is talking about the essence of religion. He's interested in the transcendence, the impulse toward transcendence in humanity, what I sometimes refer to as the metaphysical instinct. He was really interested in that. He defines universal religion in the following way. The concept of universal religion as a unifying and revitalizing spiritual force in the life of mankind must be non-dogmatic, non-denominational, cosmocentric, creative, and existential. It is creative universalism, not an abstractly general and non-committal attitude of the mind. It is a self-transcending religious aspiration which aims at the fulfillment of man in creative fellowship with the evolutionary world spirit beyond all religious differences. I am sure we can teach a whole course on this statement, so not so much time now to go into it, but you can see so much it's packed in here. And elsewhere he says, at the very center of man's religious consciousness lies hidden his growing sense of higher values, his love of truth, beauty, justice, freedom, peace, and progress. So Dr. Chaudhuri often speaks in his books and his lectures about these ideals. And so this is the essence of religion that he's talking about. But he was also careful to distinguish authentic universal religion from other forms that he calls false and outmoded conceptions of universality. The first of these is denominational universalism, which he defines as liberal religious movement within the framework of a particular religious faith. For Chaudhuri, genuine universalism is spirituality beyond all labels. Genuine universalism is not just a liberal and tolerant attitude of the mind. It is a comprehensive truth vision that belongs to a level of consciousness beyond the mind. Again, at the core of most world traditions, there is a universal dimension. Buddhism is a universal religion. Hinduism is a universal religion. So is Christianity and Islam and so on and so forth. And there are practitioners within these traditions that reach to a level of universality of their own tradition. But Dr. Chaudhuri is interested in going beyond this. So it definitely wants to go beyond labels and beyond the mind in his idea. And the other three things that he talks about very quickly is, these are also outmoded ones, doctrinal universalism, or theories and doctrines about commonality of all religions. And he says this is not considered authentic because it is difficult, if not impossible, to find a set of doctrines common to all religions. And then another one is philosophic universalism, which is an intellectual or dispassionate philosophical approach to religion rather than a lived or embodied vision of truth. So, that's out the door too. And then finally, mystic universalism of the kind that encourages self-annihilation is considered inauthentic to him, since authentic universalism is not disruptive of individuality. So here again, we see this individuality being held up very well. This is a cover of a book that came out. I'll try to finish very quickly here. And for the 50th anniversary of the fellowship, and there's a statement about Dr. Chaudhuri strongly believing in the development of mutual understanding between cultures, worked actively to bridge the gap between the technological, rational-oriented expertise of the West and the philosophic spiritual heritage of the East. So I will finish here by quoting from Sri Aurobindo. This unity in diversity is yet another statement, which really encapsulate everything that we've talked about today. And another quote from Aurobindo from The Life Divine. Unity is the basis of the Gnostic consciousness. Mutuality, the natural result of its direct awareness of oneness in diversity. Harmony, the inevitable power of the working of its force. Unity, mutuality, and harmony must therefore be the inescapable law of common or collective Gnostic life. What form it might take would depend upon the will of evolutionary manifestation of the supernature, but this would be its general character and principle. So I will finish here, and thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Bahman. I'm going to invite our attendees to ask questions through the Q&A function, and I can read those to Bahman. We have maybe 5 minutes here. And I don't have anything in the chat as of now, so I'll open it up to the panel. If anybody has a question, please unmute yourself and ask.
I want to thank you for that. It was really wonderful. And it paralleled a bit. I kept quoting from Savitri because I find that his mantric use of the English language just, empowers English to be the mantric force. But understandably, you went for the Life Divine. It's a bit more mental. I was doing a poetic version, and I found a lot of very beautiful parallels in what I was hoping to get across and what you also were hoping to get across. So it's very beautiful. And some of Haridas's quotes, the one where he talked, he just seemed to paraphrase Sri Aurobindo very beautifully for the simple Western mind, those who maybe didn't want to go into it when he, that opening chapter in The Life Divine, when Sri Aurobindo says man's earliest preoccupation will ultimate be his last, seemed that he was quoting or paraphrasing that concept. So thank you very much.
Yes, thank you so much. Yes, he definitely had a knack for speaking to the Western audiences, and that was the key for his success. And he opened the fellowship as a forum for a dialogue of all cultures and philosophies and so on. It started as a Sri Aurobindo Center. That would have probably limited, and same thing with the Institute. So what he's doing here is not really going for the Gnostic community that Sri Aurobindo is talking about. I think that would be more advanced. Maybe the groups that are involved in the yoga and those are the people that are closer to that ideal. But he opened it up to all people, and by creating a kind of a universal platform. This is this feeling that I had on the first day that I walked into the fellowship building. There was actually an event going on, but I just felt after a while, here is some kind of a United Nations of something new. This is what came to me. Like there's all these, traditions and there was just something in the air that I still feel is so alive. This was getting people ready to go beyond their dogmatisms and beyond their little corners and just into maybe some preparation for what is to come. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, Bahman, I also enjoyed your talk a lot. And I think, as you mentioned, it was more like a hermeneutic exercise in teasing out the elements of contemplative civilization. And I think you did that beautifully. And it really is significant because I think it's all there. It's all there. That's really what his message is. And I think it's timely to interpret him in that way. So
Yeah.
thanks very much.
Thanks, David. Appreciate it.
And before we move on, yeah, I just wanted to say that I vividly remember the first day I came across a website, a part of the CIIS website that I believe you put together, of some of his lectures, audio recordings. And I put on the recording one day. I think I was in the middle of there was a process. I was kind of in movement or in transition in the house somewhere, and I heard his voice. And within a minute, I was sitting in front of the speaker, and it really brought me to sit. And it was almost like the invitation to contemplate was being so strongly. I really felt that right through the power of his voice. And so I think that yeah, you're
Yes.
bringing up
You're talking
very
about
special
the
time.
CIIS Digital Commons repository, not the website, which is a separate thing. But yeah, if anybody Googles Digital Commons at CIIS, you'll find some old conferences and talks of Dr. Chaudhuri. Hopefully, this conference will get there someday.
Yes, indeed. And I just actually shared that link. So for
Oh,
anybody who's
thank
in,
you, thank you.
it's I've shared it with all the attendees.
So thank you, thanks everyone.
Yes, and maybe as a small segue, I could say that if anybody does want to hear more from you on this, on the roots of CIIS and your involvement with it, you were a guest on the East West Psychology podcast, which I'll share that link as well. And so I recommend people to go there. And that's the segue is that our next speaker was also a guest on this podcast. And so
Jonathan,
yes,
sorry, I see two questions. Have you seen those? I see this open question and answer.
really. Okay.
Yeah,
Thank you for pointing that out.
I
I don't.
see a question from Margaret Faines and one from Mike Hebel.
Great. Well, if you see them, then can you read them out for me? And I'm going to try to find why I don't see them. Okay. I can.
First, Margaret's is a comment. She says, "Thank you so much for the clear explanation of Dr. Chaudhuri's thought. Linking Dr. Chaudhuri's and Sri Aurobindo's ideas was so helpful and provides resources for further exploration." And Mike's question is, this is a question for you, Bahman. At the time of Dr. Chaudhuri's death in 1975, what was the relationship between CIF and CIAS?
CIF and CIAS were both closely tied together, although separate institutions. CIAS and CIIS were incorporated separately because of legal reasons and for accreditation reasons. But at the time, Dr. Chaudhuri was the president of both institutions. So there was just a lot of interaction between the two institutions. I believe Mike himself walked into the fellowship building early on in the 60s, so he has first experience of that. But you know, the institutions were separate, totally separate, and they are still today, and they will remain separate. So it's just that CIAS emerged as a spin-off from the fellowship.